I don't think there's any community in America where police and journalists are dealing with each other the same way that were 10 years ago. It's my pleasure to welcome Tony Plohetski to the stage here. Tony is a Murrow Award-winning, which we love to say, Murrow Award-winning investigative journalist whose work spans print, television, and digital, and he's working on breaking news today, so work never stops across all three platforms. At the Austin American Statesman and KVUE, Tony has extensive experience dealing with and reporting on police. His work as an investigative reporter has changed policies and laws. Please help me welcome Tony to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be in New Orleans. I grew up about 80 miles north, just across the Mississippi state line. So I'm very happy to be here and happy to be talking about a topic that I think is really important, and as Michael mentioned, particularly important to how we're doing our jobs as journalists and how we are covering the police. So I want to talk about some of the work that I've done in Austin and in Texas in recent years, but also I'm curious to know what your questions are too, and some of your concerns about how we cover police and law enforcement. As Michael mentioned, I'm a longtime reporter in Austin. I'm in my 24th year. I know you can't tell that by looking at me, but I started when I was right out of college at the Austin American Statesman and covered policing as a beat for the first dozen years of my career, and then in 2011 joined the investigative team at the Austin American Statesman with sort of a wide range of topics that I would do investigations for, but law enforcement and criminal justice and law enforcement accountability has always been sort of my home. In 2013, people are always interested in this too. I started working collaboratively with the local ABC station in Austin. So essentially the way it works is that the reporting I do for one, I do for the other. So a newspaper or a digital story is then transformed to a television package or some other television format. So I've been in that role and sort of this dual role for more than a decade. Happy to talk about that as well. So people often wonder how and why I got into covering the police. And I think a lot of it is that it, for me, has been the perfect marriage of what I am interested in as a journalist, what satisfies me, the type of reporting that really fuels me, but also the need in our communities. And this has been true, obviously, prior to George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis in 2020. But obviously, for people who cover police as a beat or as part of what they do, breaking news has traditionally and is traditionally a part of that. And so if you want to really get your blood flowing and your adrenaline jump running, I think we all know that getting sent out on a story, a breaking news story, particularly on deadline or right before deadline, is a way to do that. I've always been interested, and I'm sure many of you all are too, and we know that there is a big audience for true crime kind of coverage. A salacious murder, for example, that has all sorts of layers to it. Just last week, I finished helping ABC's 2020. I served as a consultant for a case, a 2-hour episode that ran last Friday on a murder in Austin. It involved the murder of a well-known cyclist, and she was a rising star in the cycling community. She was killed basically by a woman who was jealous that the cyclist was friends with that woman's boyfriend. One note about true crime coverage, and I know that this is part of what we as journalists talk about and have been talking about, and that's also making choices about who and what we cover. So I just want to raise that as an issue too, that certainly true crime, we know that there's an audience for it, but we also want to be mindful about, well, why are we putting so much attention on one case and not another? And if it's that it drives digital traffic, I'm not sure that's always the right reason to pursue those stories. Obviously, there's that ongoing balance and ongoing friction that I know we all know about. But perhaps most importantly is that my work in recent years has transitioned more to accountability of law enforcement, investigations of law enforcement, and even predating the social justice movement of 2020. In Austin and in Texas, where I live and work, I was seeing a tremendous need for those types of stories, and frankly, a way that we as journalists and news outlets and news organizations can solidify our importance in a community when we are really going behind the curtain, backstage, and peeling back the curtain to try to really bring stories to our viewers and to our readers and news consumers that they otherwise would not know. So I'm just going to take a minute to walk you through some types of police coverage. Of course, there is the breaking news, and obviously, we are at something of a disadvantage in terms of covering police on breaking news stories. We know that the police are always going to be the front line of communication in a breaking news event. If something goes awry, or if there's a shooting or some other calamity or disaster in our community, of course, we are going to interact with the police in breaking news situations. Yes, they are almost always going to be our front line of communication, but I think we've also seen over time that there are a lot of caveats that go along with that, and that the police, frankly, sometimes are wrong in the initial information that they give us. So what do we do about that in breaking situations? Well, we may report and attribute what they tell us, but it's important that we continue to do our due diligence, talking to maybe witnesses who are at the scene, if they are still there, and trying to really substantiate and corroborate what the police are telling us. We're going to talk more about that soon. I've also done what I'm calling sort of community-based enterprise. I did a series of stories in 2021 called Reforming the Force. It was a joint partnership where basically we did a 3-part series about police reform and whether or not it was working in Austin, whether or not everyone at the table was satisfied about how it was going. And then as part of our coverage, we brought together a table of policing experts, community activists and advocates, police reformers, and had that conversation. And then, as I mentioned, there is perhaps the highest and best use of our time and journalistic resources and power, if you will, is through investigative reporting, stories that call police and policing and law enforcement and really the entire criminal justice system to account. This is a quick screen grab from a story that I did about a man who lived in suburban Houston, actually, but a suburban Austin Police Department arrested him and charged him with an assault that they say occurred at this town outside of Austin. Except there was one big problem with their arrest. The young man had never stepped foot in the town where this alleged crime happened, and so he was wrongly arrested. And by the way, once you get arrested, it's really hard to undo that. So that story sort of chronicled his journey to having his case dismissed. But again, with regard to accountability reporting, I just wanted to give some examples of some of the work that I've done that has deeply resonated with the community or the state. Obviously, Uvalde, there's breaking news on that this morning, and even the nation. So I've been dealing with that. So sorry for running just a moment late. But I want to tell you the story of Breon King. That happened in 2016. And for me, as a journalist covering policing, it was really a turning point, I think, in my own mind about why it is so important that journalists and communities across the nation are asking the right questions and doing the right kind of work. Breon King is a black woman, a kindergarten teacher, and she was driving in the summer of 2015 to her summer job, tutoring kids, and was admittedly speeding and pulled over immediately in a Wendy's parking lot. And so began a very violent confrontation in which a police officer yanked her from her car, threw her in the air. And I'm actually going to show just a clip of that. I do want to warn you, it is difficult to watch. By the way, as are all of these examples. And then on the way to jail, and I'll play an excerpt of that, Breon King was lectured by an Austin police officer in a way that was deeply disturbing, I think, to anyone. But why this was such an important story, and you can see it was published in 2016, it was, I'm sorry, swept under the proverbial rug, what happened to her. And it was not until someone brought me the story a year later that I realized that this was really significant, not only because it happened and what happened, but because the layer of internal accountability in the Austin Police Department was essentially non-existent. They deemed that the officers in this case did not violate any department policies. And I think as we watch it, Michael, the first clip, the first two clips, you'll see why that was so striking as an investigative reporter.
Man, take a seat back in the car, please. Take a seat back in your vehicle, please. Okay, man, we're being pulled over right now, so I need you to take a seat back in the car.
Are you serious?
Yes, ma'am, I'm not joking. This is your driver's license. You're being stopped for speeding.
But I'm already stopped, so technically can you stop me? Because
Yes,
you didn't
ma'am.
pull me over because I parked.
Ma'am, you were about to go inside without a wallet, so I know you were only coming here because you knew I was coming to pull you over.
Mm-hmm.
I can ask them to stop you if you've already parked, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's your driver's license.
Yeah.
All right, take a seat back in your car so we can close the door. Put your feet back in the car so I can close the door,
Can you please
please.
hurry up?
Okay, ma'am, stand up for me, okay?
Okay.
No.
No, why are you
Get out of-
touching me?
Stop resisting.
Oh my God!
Stop resisting.
Oh my God!
Stop resisting.
Where's the
Stop
bag?
resisting.
Where's the...
Stop resisting
I'm
right now.
not-
Get out of the car.
I'm getting out. Let me get out. Do not
Good,
touch
so I
me.
need one at Wendy's.
Do not touch me.
Get out of the car
I'm
now.
getting out. Ow! Oh my God!
Put your hands behind your back.
Oh my God!
Put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest. Put your hands behind your back.
God, why are you doing this to
Put
me?
your hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back.
Oh my God, are you serious?
Put your hands behind
Oh
your
my
back.
God!
I'm about to tase you.
Leave me alone! Are you kidding me?
Put your hands behind your back right now.
God, will you let me get down, please?
Get down.
I'm pissing off the stop. Are you shitting me? Oh my God, come to
Put your hands behind your back.
That's what I was doing! Are you serious? God, stop.
Don't stand up.
I'm not trying to stand up. I'm trying to put my hands behind my back.
So a source actually called me to their office and showed me that video. You can imagine the shock that I think we all had watching it. Keep in mind that, again, internally in the Austin Police Department, that use of force was deemed within policy. It actually gets worse. Breon King is arrested for resisting arrest and is taken to jail in Austin. And I say it gets worse. How could it? But she decides that she wants to engage a police officer about policing and the perception that policing have of minorities. And she basically gets a lecture.
But I've never seen it done. Fortunately, I've never done for it. Yeah, because I don't know, somebody wants to get fired just because.
But do you still believe that there's racism out there?
Yes. I do.
So how do you find
Let me ask you this, though. Let me ask you this. Do you believe it goes both ways?
I believe it does. I do.
I do too.
But I believe that, I believe that Caucasians have more supremacy over black people. Let's be honest. They have more rights.
I don't think that.
A little afraid of black people because of everything. Honestly,
Well, let me ask you this. Why are so many people afraid of black people?
That's what I want to figure out.
I can give you a really good idea why it might be that way. Violent tendencies. And I want you to think about that. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying that I can prove it or nothing. But 99% of the time, when you hear about stuff like that, it is the black community that's being violent. That's why a lot of the white people are afraid, and I don't blame them. There's some guys I look at, yeah, I know it's my job to deal with them, and I know it's probably going to go ugly, but that's the way it goes.
The Austin Police Department missed 4 opportunities for this to come to the highest levels of the department. Breon King filed a civil lawsuit. That was never taken to the highest levels of the police department. No one, until our coverage occurred, thought that this was a problem. And again, I tell you that story because for me, it really solidified, if it's happening in Austin, that type of incidents, those types of incidents are happening all over the nation. And it was really a defining time for me and defining coverage. Several years later, in 2020, early 2020, before George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, I started hearing about the in-custody death of a man named Javier Ambler. And what I was initially told is that Javier Ambler had died under suspicious circumstances while in law enforcement custody, and that he died while cameras from the TV show Live PD were rolling and captured his death. We began fighting for video, fighting for any sort of information, and finally, in the spring of 2020, learned more of the details, and that is that Javier Ambler was traveling home from a poker game with friends. He failed to dim his headlights to ongoing traffic. Deputies outside of Austin with a live PD crew with them began chasing him. There was a 20-minute chase into Austin, and Ambler crashed his car, at which time, according to the deputies, who now stand charged with manslaughter and are going to trial next month on manslaughter charges, they say he resisted arrest. They tased him multiple times, some of which was caught on camera, as he was telling them that he has congestive heart failure and that he could not breathe, and Javier Ambler died that night. But as part of our coverage that went on for months, we were able to document other instances of excessive force, presumably for entertainment value for this TV show, Live PD. We were able to document other instances, including a home raid where authorities could have easily have arrested this suspect. Earlier in the day, he had gone to the courthouse for a status hearing on his case. So instead of quietly arresting him, or not even quietly, just arresting him at that point. Instead, hours later, with live PD cameras rolling, they used all sorts of ammunition to enter his home with live PD cameras rolling and forcibly took him into custody on live national television. The story of Javier Ambler resulted in, again, the 2 deputies being charged with manslaughter. The sheriff and an assistant county attorney are also charged with conspiring to destroy video evidence in the case. And Texas actually passed a law, bipartisan, that banned television production companies from partnering with law enforcement agencies, saying that law enforcement and policing is not for entertainment. And so we actually published and aired this story on June 8th. And the main reason is we did not get the video that we had been asking for until the last week of May. Obviously, by then, the public attention was shifting, and there was a lot happening just on this topic in general. And then most recently, I was deeply involved with the Uvalde mass shooting coverage of 2022. And we were able to become the first news outlets in the nation to obtain the 77-minute hallway video that showed the failed law enforcement response. Law enforcement, instead of acting to take down the gunman inside the classroom, mingling in the hallway, talking on their cell phone, looking at floor plans, trying to find keys for a classroom that ultimately they didn't need. So I tell you these stories just to point out that in all of our communities, there are these types of issues and these types of potentials for coverage that I hope we are all applying ourselves to. So how do you get these stories, and really any story involving the police? Well, good sourcing often comes from within an agency, and I think we can all acknowledge that the relationship between journalists and law enforcement is difficult at times. We need them for information because they can supply information, particularly on breaking news events, when there is a community desire and demand and a hunger for urgent and accurate and groundbreaking information. So we need them, but yet, again, I think our highest mission and our highest goal as journalists should really be using our journalistic lens to point in their direction when necessary. And I'm not saying that there are not other types of policing stories that we can and should tell. I actually think there are. But at the same time, the need for good reporting concerning law enforcement and accountability reporting remains high. So yes, I think if you are a journalist on the ground in your community, you always want to look for the people who are most chatty, as I tell people. There's one in every crowd. There's at least one in every crowd. So find that person, invite them to coffee, pick their brain, build a rapport with them, build a relationship with them. Call them when you don't need something, when you're not working on a story, and make sure that there is an open line of communication so that if something comes across their desk or they do hear something going on in their own agency, they think of you and they know to call you. Certainly also police union leaders can provide information at times. They always know what's going on inside the administration in a way that the administration won't tell you. So yes, they often may have their own agenda, but doesn't everyone typically when they bring us information? So often worth listening to. But then there are other really good sources out there that I think sometimes we don't often think of, who may be less obvious to us. And of course, there are reformers and police advocates and activists. Many communities have in recent years developed created police monitors offices or civilian oversight offices. Those agencies can also be really, really useful with regard to information. Also, I find that prosecutors' offices can be very good because a lot of these, in terms of getting information, because a lot of cases, objectionable cases, especially now, do get routed to prosecutors for review for potential criminal charges. In Austin, we have a civil rights division, and so talking to that division and the supervisors of those divisions in your own communities can be interesting and enlightening as well with regard to trends that they may be seeing or the types of cases that they are investigating, and sometimes even specific cases that they are investigating. Defense attorneys will often, if your source base can include a wide range of defense attorneys, that's also beneficial. I've had stories brought to me, particularly about police misconduct or police excessive force, that was discovered by defense lawyers once they got discovery as part of an ongoing criminal case. And then, of course, there's the community at large. I know we all have daily deadline pressures and things we have to get done every day, but if you're not taking the time, and as news managers, if you're not giving your journalists the time to actually be out in the community, talking to people in neighborhoods, what are their concerns about policing? What are their good stories about policing? I think that can be a miss for us as well, but definitely neighborhood-driven and community-driven policing stories, I think, are really important. And then just a note here for news managers and for reporters as well. You know, if you're not asking or politely demanding regular time for source development, I think that is a definite miss for a news outlet. I encourage journalists in my own newsroom, particularly in television. I know that there is more emphasis on sort of daily production and daily stories, but I always encourage my younger colleagues, or really any colleagues, but especially my younger ones, you know, be proactive about asking the assistant news director or assignment manager or the news director for maybe a day a month. And then I say to that person, but use that day a month. I want to see you like buzzing because you're so caffeinated, right? So by the end of the day, you've had 4 coffee meetings with different potential sources. Just a reminder, I know this is pretty obvious, the payoff for that may not be immediate, right? So the person you may have coffee with on Wednesday may not call you on Thursday and say, hey, I've got something for you. Did you know, ... Those are always my favorite phone calls, by the way. And then just a couple of things that I wanted to also point out. I know I mentioned this, and maybe it's widely known, maybe it's not, by those of us who cover policing. And that is using the police as the official narrator for what happened. This really has come into focus, I think, on the national stage a couple of times in the past 3.5 years. But that is, you know, this infamous now press release from the Minneapolis Police Department about a man dying after medical incident during police interaction. We all now know that man was George Floyd. And I think there's a sentence in here that is just so striking. It's like, I can't really see it, but it says, he went into medical distress and died several minutes later. And as someone once said, that's, you know, it's the longest and in history, knowing that what actually happened during that time is that police officer Derek Chauvin was kneeling on his neck. Then, of course, this story that I produced, this is a story, long-form story that I did for the Austin American-Statesman after the Uvalde mass shooting in 2022. And we were able, as part of our digital presentation here, to pull clips from government officials, including Alejandro Mayorkas, the governor of Texas, law enforcement, local law enforcement, state law enforcement, all within the first 12 hours after the Uvalde mass shooting, putting forward this deeply erroneous narrative that but for the swift action of police, that more children would have died at Robb Elementary School on May 24th, 2022. We now, of course, know that there was nothing swift, that it took them 77 minutes to finally breach the door of that classroom. So that is a striking example. I think these two are both very striking examples about while we rely on police for sort of the first generation of the story, we always should be digging deeper behind those accounts to make sure that the facts actually add up to how they are presenting them to the public. So that's all I have for now. DM me on X or Instagram or email me, whatever might be useful. But thank you so much for having me. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Amanda Denise here with WCTI. So my question for you is, how do you have accountability reporting without, I guess, quote unquote, burning bridges with the police department?
It's a great question, and it's one that comes up frequently. You know, I think honestly, there's a way that we as journalists can build trust and should be building that trust with not only policing, but all the people we cover. I always believe in being absolutely straightforward with people. I have never once, I say that, we should never say never, right? But I do not believe I have ever, for example, scheduled an interview under one pretense and then taken the conversation another direction just when I get there. It's like, if you don't want to talk about this with me on camera publicly, then okay, that's your answer. I bristle when I hear or see other journalists doing that, and I don't think it helps us build trust. So typically, I'm very honest about what I'm working on, what I'm doing. Now, I will say this, I have been strategic about when I tell them. Like, I'm not sure they're my first phone call, right? You know, like I may not tell them 2 weeks in advance. But I think it's important that we just say at some point in our reporting, sooner rather than later, that we are working on this. But most importantly, the reason to inform them is because we want to hear what they have to say about it. And so I think, to answer your question, that level of transparency on our part, and really I consider it fairness on our part, I think can help ensure that once a story is aired or published, that yes, there may be difficult feelings, but it has been my experience that those difficult challenges can be worked through sooner rather than later, if you have been honest. To also that end, I've been very clear with people, like, I am showing this moment, I am showing this document, so that there is a no surprise sort of element to this. I've also, and I don't know how many of us do this. I'm in my 24th year, right? So I think journalism has evolved, but I can remember early in my career, sort of other journalists kind of playing hide the ball, and I would always think, they're going to read the story, like just tell, like they're going to see it. You might as well just tell them what's going to be in there. Another thing that I've done too, this is a very long answer to your pretty simple question, but you know, I often will call them soon after a story airs or is published and kind of face the music. You know, what did you think? And talk it through, instead of like dodging them or acting like I did something wrong, because I didn't do anything wrong. Or if they think I did, welcome the opportunity for them to tell me.
Hi, Elaine Rojas Castillo with WTMJ in Milwaukee. So I've actually taken some time to kind of look through your clips on various issues, and something that we deal with in Milwaukee, and I'd imagine a lot of us here deal with, is when you're trying to talk to police, particularly after a police-involved incident or something that doesn't start that way, but then through our investigation, we find that there has. The relationship between the PIO and us, sometimes what we ask for or what we are curious about gets diluted or gets changed. And by the time it reaches the police chief or it reaches a person higher up, they're getting a different, not only request, but the intention is different. So
Like they send you a statement answering a question that you didn't even ask, kind of thing.
Or what happens in this room stays in this room, right? So the PIO for the Milwaukee Police Department is a sergeant, and I think it's fair to say he's not people's favorite person. Basically what happens is we'll have an incident, we'll reach out, and it'll take forever to get an answer, and then if we ask more than a question, we get shot down or railroaded. And then it leads us to having to find the police chief's schedule, figure out where he's gonna be, try to ask him ourselves. But by the time we've gotten there, the aggression that he has for us, the PIO has for us, has bled into what the chief is prepared to say. And, you know, we have a huge year in Wisconsin. We've got the RNC, the election itself goes through Wisconsin. What do you recommend for us trying to gear up to deal with a lot? I mean, we're dealing with Secret Service, we're dealing with all these other groups. What would you say to us, or what would you suggest for us if we're already having issues dealing with local law enforcement? What can we do to improve that relationship, and what do you recommend as we start dealing with federal agencies that are coming into our backyard and trying to figure out how to get through to them?
Okay, so first of all, federal agencies are a whole nother kind of ball game, but we can talk about that. You know, Sergeant PIO, look, there's one in every crowd, right? I think that if I were in your shoes, and I don't know much about your shoes other than what you just told me, but if I were in them, I would reach out to the sergeant and just say, time out, how about coffee? Let's sit down and try to figure out, it feels like there's mounting tension on both sides here. How can we work in a way that you feel as though you're doing your job, I feel as though I'm getting the questions answered that I need to have answered, or getting the information that I need. This can be a grenade, but the police chief should have a publicly available email that you can use, and get to know the police chief too. I mean, I don't know the dynamic can be difficult if the PIO feels like it's his job to protect the police chief. Well, then that's a problem within itself. But the police chief is the top policing executive in your town, and should readily be able and willing to talk to a journalist, any journalist, but especially a local one who covers his or her community.
Thank you.
Hi.
Can you tell us what happened to Breon King with her civil lawsuit? And then you said that the officers were not held accountable. They were kind of let off the hook. How did you get the police camera video, the dash cam and the arrest cam? When I think of Breon King, I get kind of verklempt, because she said to me after that coverage, and this is going to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, and I'm really not trying to do that, but it was such a moment kind of in my career.
She said that she felt as though for a year, no one listened to her, no one took her seriously. And it was not until this coverage that created this huge firestorm. And the very next year, HBO made a documentary about what happened to her called Traffic Stop. And Breon King, it was nominated for an Academy Award, and Breon King went to Los Angeles and stood on the red carpet, and I think it was a really transformative moment in her life. So that's part of what happened to her. Her lawsuit was settled. I forgot the amount, but it was not insubstantial. And in terms of what happened in the department, that actually began a reform conversation that is still ongoing in our community. And what I mean by that is, by the time that the police chief says he learned about the incident, under Texas civil service law, if no one can be disciplined for something that happened outside of 6 months. So the police chief said, I didn't know about this within the 6-month window, and so therefore I was not able to impose discipline. As part of the employment contract with the police office, with the police union in Austin, they have extended that, saying that the police chief can impose discipline when he or she learns about an incident and not put a deadline on it. I can't tell you. It was not through the front door. It was not through a public information request.
Was that the same officer that arrested her that was taking her to?
Two different officers.
I didn't think she would have a conversation with that.
Yeah, but the fact that it was two, I think, to many people, demonstrated a much deeper and wider cultural systemic issue.
You have a question here.
Hi.
Hi, Emily Goodell, Yakima Bureau Chief at Apple Valley News Now in Washington State. I have a question about accountability journalism when it comes to police technology. For my own edification, can I get a show of hands how many people have flock cameras in their cities? Does anyone know? Okay. So for anybody who doesn't know, flock cameras, automatic license plate readers using AI, they can send automatic notifications. Everybody knows. So we have them, like hundreds of them now, all over the entire county, and police are very happy about them because, crime has gone down significantly. They can solve homicides, drive-by shootings, but I've seen a lot about issues when it comes to the fact that any one of those jurisdictions, people who raise their hands, their police departments can access any of the data from any of the flock cameras across the country. So we have people from New York, people from Texas who can access the data here. So when it comes to that sort of thing, and I just saw that Austin is supposed to get them by the end of February 2024. So do you have any advice for going and digging into that more and reporting on that?
I don't, because it's kind of new frontier kind of stuff for me. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer to your questions. But there are always questions around any sort of new technology or new infrastructure, down to who they purchased it from and for how much, and the contract and what it stipulates and that type of thing. So if I were, and maybe I should, since Austin is doing it, kind of start looking in those areas.
I'll try to make this cohesive. So I think the pandemic, especially for a small market and small town, police and PIOs just got so used to let's just do a Zoom, or we'll just send you a video of our sound bites. And or if anyone else wants to come and give me some advice, but so when big incidents do happen, instead of giving media the opportunity to ask them questions in a press conference type setting, they just throw up a video of the police chief talking with no questions being able. And I'm coming from, I worked in Nashville for 7 years, and then now I'm a news director in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is a significantly smaller market, and I'm navigating a new world, I guess. So how would you suggest I navigate that? Like, we should have the opportunity to ask questions, but we're not given that in the PIO. I think they're just still in that, like, they got away with it for so
Yeah.
long. So what would you say?
I'm of two minds about it. I mean, the first thing that I would try is actually talking to them directly. Again, sort of finding the police chief's email if you don't have it, and just, from a outreach perspective, say, hey, this dynamic is not really working for us as journalists covering the community that you are the police chief in, and see if that gets you anywhere. If it's a hard no, then I think you have to start reporting that. Then I think your copy says, the police chief released a 2-minute video describing the incident. XYZ news outlet attempted to reach the police chief to ask additional questions, or attempted to reach Public Information Officer Joe Jones, and they declined to answer additional questions about this incident.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
I'm from the NPR station in Kansas City, and so I've covered a ton of really bad stories, much like you outlined in your program here. But I have this weird predicament that a police chief went into a notoriously corrupt, smallish department in our metro area a couple of years ago, and I think he's turned it around. And I've met with him, and he's gone through all of the things that he did and all the data to support it. Who do you go to as sort of a national expert on accountability, bad or good? It's not up to me to say what he's doing has turned the department around. You know what I mean? I would like an expert for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's can be difficult. I think critics of our work may say, you quote these policing experts, but guess what? They're the police. Like, they all think the same. I'm not sure that we shouldn't still use policing experts, but for that particular story, I think I would be interested in reporting other aspects of it. So, what does his own community, his community, what does his own community say? I mean, do they sort of confirm this notion that he has turned it around? What do his bosses say? What do reformists and advocates in his community say? But yes, I mean, I think it is also fair and appropriate. So to answer your question, I've called upon PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, for that type of work. The major city police chiefs I've called upon for that type of work. And there also, I don't have it in front of me, but I also keep a good list of academic experts, and sometimes those can be maybe have the appearance of more objectivity because they're maybe once worked in policing, but they're outside of a direct line to policing now. And typically it's been my experience, they have really thoughtful contributions to make.
Hi, I'm Kat Stromquist with Gulf States Newsroom. We're public radio in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. When covering policing, can you talk about some of the lesser known documents you've obtained, beyond your incident reports or disciplinary files? Like what are some of like the big dig pieces of records that you've found?
Maybe this is becoming standard, but sometimes I think it's not. It's the video. Like, always ask for the video. That if that's not part of our standard sort of records request now, it definitely should be. The 3 stories that I pointed out all had video. A caveat about video, which I think we also all sort of recognize. Video doesn't always tell the story, right, or the full story. So we want to be mindful of that. But I think video is something that we should always routinely be asking for. But lesser known documents, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, like, emails about an incident are always good to ask for example.
Thanks.
Hi.
Ashley Hamilton with WGNO.
Hey, Ashley.
Here from New Orleans, I cover New Orleans crime.
Yep.
We have a lot of juveniles that are killed. I go out, talk to the parents. I go to the balloon release. NOPD sends out a statement. They'll tell us that they're working on it. 6 months later, the mother called. I always get a mother call me, hey, NOPD, they're not in here yet. They're not doing anything. The detectives won't answer my calls. So, of course, my assistant news director is going to tell me, hey, we got to have both sides. Of course, the mom wants to talk, but we have to hear what NOPD says. Reach out to them. No reply. I call, email. How do I go about getting my assistant news director to still let me do the story without them if they're not going to talk and they're going to send me the same statement of we're still investigating? Or how do I go about talking to them to give me more? Like, is there a different question that I should be asking them for to try to get more info on where they are on the case?
So Ashley, I happen to have a really good friend and very solid journalist in your own newsroom, Susie. And so sometimes I think we can mobilize other people to kind of help go to bosses to help convince them. But look, I would say to your assistant news director, it's not wait until the end of time for a response from this agency. It's what is fair that we feel like and have done our job. So no, they can't. I mean, that's really bad if you're in a position. I mean, bad's pejorative. I shouldn't have probably used that word. I find it troublesome that you know, because what it says to the agency is, oh, we can veto stories by just writing the clock out. That is not what we should be doing. I support the effort to get both sides, and we absolutely should do that. Both sides, all sides, every side. But I think it's fair to say to your news director or assistant news director, I've asked them 3 times over 3 days in a specific way. I've informed them that we are prepared to go with the story with or without them, and then put it on television.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Paris Flanagan from KTC TV3 out of Lafayette. So I'm in the middle of a really juicy story right now with the police chief in Opelousas. So he's caught up in an entanglement, I guess you can say. And so my thing is that I'm at the point in the story where I'm tired of not having a character or a human element. So I'll talk with my bosses, my news director, and one of my bosses is in the audience over there. So my thing is that I'm hungry to get a council person to elaborate on this. You know, what do you think? The police chief who's elected, you know, is, I guess, going around, you know, dipping down with, you know, all these women. And so my thing is how do you tell that story without having, similar to her question, without the police department talking to you or, you know, giving you like information? They're just mute. They're quiet. You go to a council member, they don't want to talk. You go to the mayor, I don't want to say anything as well. You have sources. I have sources in the community who would love to go on camera and tell me about his whole entire personal life. And it's just like, the story is good, but it's dry. And I just want to make it more, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So that story sounds difficult and challenging, and like, you know, you want to make sure it is completely buttoned up. I don't know, I'm only going off of what you just told me in your synopsis. But if you and your news management believe that you have sort of met the journalistic standard for reporting, then I think you should report it without a main character or without the, you know, wonderful soundbite or without the gnat sound that you know, all of that. Sometimes as journalists, once we have met, again, what I consider our journalistic threshold, that you have vetted it with your bosses, maybe even corporate people, if it's the type of thing like you're describing, you want a lot of eyeballs on that, right? And you want a lot of input. But I think once we reach that point in our reporting, we've got to tell the community what we know, and we can't necessarily wait until we have like the beautifully produced, you know, Emmy award-winning package. It's great when we can do that, but sometimes that's not necessarily in keeping with our public service mission of reporting. Excuse me. I did mean Murrow winning. Thank you.
Tony, I'm Rich Nye with Channel 13 WTHR in Indianapolis. In my market, I've got 3 pending death penalty trials of police officers shot and killed in the line of duty. Last year in 2023, we had, in Indianapolis alone, we had 17 police action shootings, 18 people shot, 10 people killed. Those all require lots of stories and lots of angles and all that. But what I want to ask is, in the context of that, do we have a responsibility as journalists to address the very difficult job that police have, the tenor toward police in general? And in Indianapolis, we're like 100 or more police officers short of what they want to hire and have the money to hire, but they can't get people to take the job. What role, if any, do we have as responsibility while we're doing accountability journalism to deal with that in our communities for people who do protect and serve?
Yeah, I think we do have a responsibility to do that. I mentioned the series I did on reforming the force in 2021. That definitely got in some of those issues. I will say, I think it's important to approach those stories from maybe a little bit of a higher level from a public policy standpoint, as opposed to simply putting the police union president on the air saying we need more police. But really diving deeper about, well, where do you need them? How do you need them? What kind of policing? And then even going beyond that, well, of the X number of police officers that the Indianapolis Police Department has, how are they deployed? And is the police department adequately and properly deploying the resources that it has? But look, I think there's no, including in Austin, there is no dispute, or I think little dispute, that law enforcement is a profession that many people are turning away from. They are reluctant to enter, and I absolutely think that can be and should be part of our body of work as journalists. And I've tried to do that as well.
There's a lot of great discussion here. The nice thing about the way we set up the day is that our next session is collaborate. We're going to get together, talk about these issues we're experiencing in newsrooms. Please join me in just thanking Tony for his time and expertise. Taking precious time away from breaking news.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you again for having me. And again, I'm happy to continue this conversation here or online or wherever.